Okay, listener. You know how sometimes you've got a situation, right? And it's just too delicate, too complex for a conventional approach.
Absolutely.
That's where today's deep dive takes us. We're talking Army Special Operations Forces, or RSOF for short, and how they handle those scenarios. And we're using ADP 305 as our guide.
What's interesting here is that these core activities they're talking about, they really go beyond just combat. We're
Right.
talking about shaping the environment itself, influencing how people think, even, building stability for the long haul, all coming from Title 10, by the way.
It's like they're playing 4D chess while everyone else is stuck with checkers.
Haha, I like that. And these missions, they're not happening in isolation. We're talking joint, interagency, even multinational settings. It's a whole different ballgame from traditional
No,
warfare,
no kidding. And with the world changing faster than ever, I bet that keeps things interesting.
to say the least.
So, knowing our listeners coming from a military background, let's get into the weeds a bit. ADP 305 talks about civil affairs operations. What's the real impact there, strategically speaking, I mean?
Think of it as building trust where it matters most with the local population. And it's not just about restoring those essential services, or that's definitely part of it.
Right.
It's about really getting those cultural nuances, understanding the grievances people have, the power dynamics, because that kind of trust, that can be the difference between getting actionable intel and, well, walking into a trap.
So you're saying a successful civil affairs operation could actually save lives down the line?
Absolutely. Think about it. What if a civil affairs unit builds a strong rapport with, say, village elders in the middle of a conflict zone?
Okay, yeah.
That relationship. That could give them early warnings about enemy movements, maybe help identify key insurgents, even help peacefully resolve disputes that might have turned violent otherwise.
Talk about a force multiplier. It's
Oh.
incredible how these actions that seem small can have such a huge ripple effect.
Okay, switching gears a little bit to something with, well, incredibly high stakes, countering weapons of mass destruction. What sticks out in ADP 305 about RSOF's role in all this?
Well, they emphasize being proactive. It's not just about reacting to WMD threats after the fact. It's about actively preventing them in the first place.
So get ahead of the curve, disrupt those threats before they even materialize.
Exactly. And doing that requires a very specific skill set. Language proficiency, understanding the culture, being able to operate discreetly in areas where, frankly, you're not welcome.
That takes us to, I think, two sides of the same coin, counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. Both are about neutralizing threats, right? But the approach, it seems pretty different.
You got it. And ADP 305 really digs into that distinction. Counterinsurgency, at its core, it's about addressing what causes the conflict in the first place.
So not just taking out the insurgents, but figuring out why they picked up arms to begin with. Right. What are they upset about? Who are their leaders? Are there social factors, economic factors, even religious factors at play? RSOF, they got to be able to not only analyze this complex human element, but advise and assist local governments in actually doing something about it.
Sounds like you need a deep understanding of, well, everything.
Mhm.
History, sociology, psychology even.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's the trust building, not just with the local communities, but with government officials too. Sometimes you're navigating these really complex political landscapes. It's a delicate dance for sure, but when it's done right, it can keep a conflict from blowing up into something much worse.
From calming down insurgencies to taking on terrorist networks, that's a pretty wide range. So how does counterterrorism play into those RSOF core activities, as defined by ADP 305?
It's a different type of precision. We're talking surgical strikes on high-value targets, disrupting their financing, dismantling training camps before they can churn out more operatives.
So neutralize the immediate threats, but also chip away at their capabilities long term.
Exactly. It takes meticulous planning, flawless execution, and a lot of times you're working with international partners to track these targets across borders. The stakes, sky high, and the margin for error, razor thin.
It's the ultimate test of skill and nerve, it sounds like. Okay, shifting focus a little to empowering allies. Let's talk foreign internal defense. What's the long game there?
It's about building up that sustainable capacity within partner nations so eventually they can handle their own security without needing us.
Give them the tools, the training, so they can stand on their own 2 feet, so to speak.
Exactly. Think of it like RSOF's training a foreign military unit on, let's say, counter IED tactics.
Okay.
But the goal isn't just teaching them that one skill. It's about helping them develop their own instructors who can then turn around and train their own people, creating a system that's self-sustaining.
That is smart, empowering them to be their own first line of defense. Now, before we jump into the next set of core activities, I got to ask, what's the common thread here? Tying all these different missions together. What's the underlying principle, I guess, behind RSOF's approach?
It's recognizing that the battlefield, it's not what it used to be. It's not just about those traditional front lines anymore. It's about understanding people, their cultures, the political realities, all the things shaping conflict in the 21st century.
So being as good at building relationships as they are at, well, dismantling threats?
Precisely, and that's what makes RSOF unique. That ability to operate in the shadows, navigate complexity, and achieve strategic objectives through unconventional tactics, all while understanding the human element.
It's like they're, I don't know, playing chess, but they also understand, like, what each piece on the board, what it wants, what it's afraid of, not just how it moves. But okay, let's look at some more of these core activities in ADP 305. There's direct action,
Mm-hmm.
which, well, sounds pretty direct.
Yeah, it is, in a way. It's probably what most people picture when they think about special operations, raids, ambushes, those precision strikes. But there's always a strategic goal behind it, and often it happens in really sensitive or contested places.
So more like a scalpel than a sledgehammer.
Exactly, like, say, a hostage rescue. You don't just need the skills to get into a secure location and take out enemy fighters. You also need that cultural understanding to maybe de-escalate things, maybe even the language skills to actually talk to the hostages.
Wow. It's really cool how RSOF operators have those specialized combat skills, but also those, I don't know, soft skills, too.
Yeah.
That's not your average soldier, that's for sure. Speaking of unique skills, ADP 305 also mentions foreign humanitarian assistance, which, I gotta admit, isn't the first thing I think of with RSOF. What do they bring to those kinds of situations?
Well, they can deploy really fast to these remote, austere locations. That makes them super valuable during disaster relief. Imagine a huge earthquake hits some far-off mountainous area. RSF can be some of the first ones on the ground, setting up comms, figuring out the damage, maybe even providing medical aid right when it matters most.
So while everyone else is trying to figure out how to get there, RSOF's already providing that lifeline.
Yep. And because they're used to working in chaotic environments, places without much infrastructure, they can just hit the ground running in a way that traditional aid organizations just can't.
Bringing order to the chaos, which is crucial in those early hours. Okay, let's change gears again, back to more strategic stuff. What about military information support operations, or MISO for short? Honestly, it sounds kind of like a spy movie.
It does have a bit of mystery to it, but basically it's about influencing what people think and how they act in order to achieve a strategic goal.
Okay, so strategic communication, but like on a whole other level.
You got it. It's about really understanding the information landscape of a region, figuring out who the key influencers are, and then crafting messages that'll actually resonate with people. It might involve radio broadcasts, leaflets, even, using social media to engage with communities.
Winning hearts and minds without firing a shot.
Exactly. And ADP 305 really highlights how important it is to coordinate MISO with those other activities we've talked about. Like, it could support a civil affairs operation by countering enemy propaganda that's trying to undermine trust in the local government. Or it could be used to shape the information environment before a direct action mission to try and minimize those civilian casualties.
It's a subtle tool, but a powerful one, it sounds like. Okay, let's talk about an activity that, well, seems like it takes thinking ahead to a whole new level. Preparation of the environment. What does that actually mean?
It's all about getting ready for future missions. And we're talking long before the main force gets there. Let's say there's a chance of some hostile activity in a remote region. Special forces teams might be sent in first to gather intel, build relationships with local groups, even set up hidden caches of supplies they can use later.
So they're setting the stage, making it safer, and more likely that the mission will be a success.
You got it. It's about thinking several steps ahead. They're trying to anticipate challenges, spot opportunities, and subtly shape the situation to their advantage. And often, the enemy doesn't even know they're there.
It's really amazing how RSOF can operate on so many different levels, from those, boots on the ground missions to these big picture strategic initiatives. And speaking of strategic, let's talk security force assistance. Sounds like building partnerships is a big part of this one.
Really is. Security force assistance, it's all about working with partner nations to help them beef up their own security. That might mean training their military, advising their governments, even helping them come up with their own counterterrorism strategies.
So it's not just about giving them a hand, it's about making sure they can eventually take care of their own security.
Exactly. And that has a ripple effect, because when the partners we work with can handle their own security challenges, well, the whole world gets a little bit safer and more stable.
It's a proactive approach to security for sure. recognizing that we all benefit from a safer world. Okay, let's get into something that, I gotta say, sounds a little like a spy movie. Special reconnaissance. What kind of intel gathering are we talking about here?
This is where we're talking about getting information that's not just top secret, but really, really hard to come by. Operating behind enemy lines, avoiding detection, bringing back those key pieces of information that can shape big decisions.
So not your everyday recon mission. This is the high-stakes stuff.
Exactly. Let's say there's a suspected weapons facility, but it's hidden deep inside enemy territory.
Okay.
A special reconnaissance team, they might be sent in to confirm it's even there, figure out what it's capable of, maybe even gather intel on the defenses around it.
So they're like the eyes and ears in the shadows, giving a clearer picture of what's happening on the ground. What does an RSOF operator need to be good at to succeed in that kind of mission?
Stealth is number one. They've got to blend in, adapt to different cultures and environments. A lot of times they're working with local assets who have that invaluable knowledge of the area.
That's really interesting how RSOF uses those local networks. It's not just about technology and firepower, it's about understanding the human side of things. All right, last core activity from ADP 305, unconventional warfare.
This is the one that really captures the imagination, I think. It makes you think of guerrilla warfare, those secret operations. Basically, it's about enabling a resistance movement or an insurgency to go up against a hostile power.
So it's like playing chess, but with a completely different set of pieces, using those unconventional forces to achieve a common goal. When would this type of warfare actually be used?
Often, it's in situations where a direct military intervention just isn't possible, or maybe it's not the best option politically, or, maybe the terrain is just too dangerous for traditional operations.
So it's working through proxies, basically,
Mm.
providing training, logistical support, maybe even intelligence to help them resist that hostile force.
Exactly. And it takes a deep understanding, not just of the military side of things, but the political landscape, too. You got to understand the motivations of the resistance movement and what the consequences of their actions might be.
High risk, high reward, for sure. But it shows how adaptable RSOF is, how they use unconventional thinking, which is what they're known for, really.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. And one thing's clear, RSOF's mission, it goes way beyond what we think of as traditional combat. These core activities, as laid out in ADP 305, they show how committed RSOF is to shaping the strategic environment, building those partnerships, and tackling security threats in a world that's constantly changing.
It's been eye-opening to learn how RSOF operates, how they work in the shadows, navigate those complex situations, and use this incredibly diverse set of core activities to achieve their goals.
And as you keep exploring ADP 305, listener, think about this. How do these core activities work together? How do they play off each other in real-world operations? Because when you see those connections, that's when you really start to grasp the nuance and, honestly, the sophistication of RSOF's approach to modern warfare.